Welcome to the Illuminating Primary Care podcast.
Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Illuminating Primary Care podcast. Today I am joined by Charlotte Humfrey, a primary care paramedic practitioner and team lead for the West London network at the Location Medical Services. Now, Charlotte is currently busy underway building up her own team of paramedics whilst also working at the acute illness clinics and urgent treatment centres. Now, Charlotte is very much used to and enjoys the fast-paced environment and broad spectrum of patients that she gets to see on a day-to-day basis, being very passionate about her role and patient care. Not to forget that Charlotte has a background in teaching, having been a paramedic clinical lecturer at the Cumbria University. Excited to have you on board, Charlotte.
Thank you. It makes me sound quite good, doesn't it, really?
You are quite good. No, very excited for this podcast to talk about, I guess, the transition for paramedics going from secondary care into primary care, and definitely thought it'd be valuable to hear your experience firsthand. So let's just dive right in. I guess what I want to start off with is kind of why did you transition from secondary care into primary care, Charlotte?
Well, honestly, it was an accident. I was a lecturer at university for a degree apprenticeship programme, so training the techs, EECs into becoming paramedics. And I did that for a year, and I realised I was missing sort of patient contact quite a lot. And I loved teaching. I really enjoyed the teaching aspect, but unfortunately with teaching, as all teachers know, comes a lot of admin. And I'm not someone that enjoys admin. So it was one of those things where I started kind of looking around, and the secondment was for a short period of time anyway. It was through the ambulance service that I was with. So I was kind of thinking about what my next options were. And it's either you continue and you enroll as a lecturer and you leave the ambulance service, or you think about something else. And to be honest, I never saw myself going into primary care, because I think I always enjoyed sort of the rush of being frontline and all of that kind of thing. And then things start to change. I think I realised in that year I got a dog, which was really nice because I could facilitate that because I was working partly from home. And I also was sleeping normal hours. A couple of things like that you suddenly realise, actually, I'm quite a well person now, which was shocking. So I kind of started looking for jobs. And to be honest, I think it was quite scary leaving such a large organisation. I think most paramedics see themselves in a frontline ambulance service and they don't really think much else beyond that. And so when I started looking around, it was quite scary to think, oh, I'm going to be leaving the ambulance service that I thought I was going to be with for my entire career. So when you start looking around, you actually realise there's so many options for paramedics. And I think because the ambulance services need you, I think you're not really enlightened on those options. And so I was quite surprised to find so many options. So I started applying, and to be honest, I wasn't expecting to hear back from anyone. And I heard back from everyone I applied for. So I went for some interviews, and the company that I ended up going with in the end is a small company, but they just really look after their staff. And I really felt a warmth from them when I had my interview. And so that's where I've ended up. And then, you never know whether it's going to amount to anything. But I've been there for just under a year, and they've been fantastic in terms of my development and giving me extra roles and stuff like that. So that's how it happened, basically.
Brilliant. No, that's really good to hear. And it's good to hear how, I guess you never anticipated going down the route of primary care, but now you're here. And I think, a lot of paramedics aren't aware of those options, I think, or kind of what beyond secondary care.
I think it's a sign of the role of the paramedic has changed drastically. So I think there's a little bit of that. So I think there's a misunderstanding of what we're capable of and where we can fit into different areas of medicine now. But I think aside from that, our development is based on large organisations, and unfortunately you don't get that one-on-one contact regarding your development. I felt a bum on a seat. So you're there to do your job, you go home and no one really knows that you exist. Now, going into primary care, you're noticed, you are thanked, everyone's happy that you're there. It was a really strange experience on my first day, whereby the GPs were thankful that I was there. Normally, you're referring to a GP and they're really unhappy about it because you're giving them extra work. But where you're taking away work, they loved you. And then you go to the patients who ordinarily wouldn't be seen by their doctors, and they're dead chuffed to see you. So you get patients being lovely to you, the doctors being lovely to you. And, you're used to frontline ambulance where you're getting abused for being late to jobs because there's not enough ambulances and stuff. So it was a complete culture shock. But yeah, like I said, it's something I always wanted to be a critical care APP, advanced practitioner. That's always what I was going to do. And to be honest, it's not off the cards at some point in the future. But I think that primary care provides a work-life balance that isn't possible in frontline ambulance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when I speak to paramedics, that's the continuing, the narrative is that the long hours, unsociable hours, the long shifts, the night shifts, not being able to, spend time with the kids, etc. So I completely get kind of where you're coming from in that, primary care has offered you that work-life balance again. So hopefully more time with your dog.
Yeah, exactly, my baby.
Exactly, yeah. And I guess in terms of benefiting you then, do you think the main benefits have been having that work-life balance and kind of those career development opportunities? I mean, how has it benefited you?
I'd say that it's more the career benefit opportunities. I think I worked very hard in the ambulance service, and I've always been very motivated to progress. I never wanted to be one of those paramedics who's kind of annoyed at the world because they're still just on an ambulance and haven't done much else. And then 7 years go by and you're like, why am I still here? I never saw myself being like that because I've got ADHD, so I get itchy feet a lot. And so I was like, right, I need to do, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? And I realized that when I would go to my personal development reviews in the ambulance service, it would be met with, well, actually, because of COVID, we're not really doing personal development reviews. We're just checking in to see how you are about COVID. I'm like, well, I'm fine with COVID. It's been going on for ages now. I want to know where my career is going, And so it was always kind of quashed a little bit. And I think that the ambulance service itself, and to be fair, medicine in general, I think is a little bit judgmental of young people coming through who don't have the years on the road experience. And it's kind of a preconception that if you don't have 10 to 15 years experience, that you aren't worthy of the promotion or worthy of some kind of new position. But I think that going to a smaller company where you're known on a one-to-one basis and you meet a lot of different people that provide you with opportunities, you suddenly, the doors start opening. People message you on LinkedIn, for example, or, in any GP surgery, they're like, oh, do you want to come and work for us? That as soon as you make an impression, you're known. And in the ambulance service, that's just it's not a thing. You just turn up, you do your job and you go home. But I think that there's been a huge amount of progression that I've had in this sector in a very short space of time. And it's because you're commended when you work hard. Whereas I don't think that happens in frontline ambulance work. I'm sure maybe some people have experienced that, but I certainly didn't. So
yeah, no, you're exactly right. I feel like, again, based on when speaking to paramedics, you hit a ceiling, like in terms of progression in the ambulance service. And like you said, it's just that routine day in, day out. There aren't any career progressions. It's just dealing with the oncoming demand. And it's great to see that primary care does offer them other avenues. Because like you said, there's an abundance of, opportunities. You just have to, I guess, go out and look for them. Yeah, exactly. And what would be your top tips for paramedics from secondary care, from the ambulance service, transitioning into primary care? Kind of what would you have wanted someone to tell you, for example?
So, obviously I'm putting together a team at the moment. So the kind of things that I'm looking for, well, to be honest, I think it's just having an enthusiasm and a want to learn. Because I'm quite happy to take someone that doesn't have experience in primary care as long as they're clearly wanting to learn, because I'll train them. That's not a problem. But it's people that are kind of stuck in their old ways and not really amenable to further education or amenable to someone who looks about 12 like me, telling them, what the way is and stuff like that. So it's more of a personality thing, I would say, more than anything. Is a want to learn. You've got to have a certain enjoyment for the intricacies of primary care as well, because I think there's a huge misconception about what primary care is, and that it's kind of a cop-out from frontline work. And actually, I would say that the challenges that you face in primary care are far more cerebral than what you had to deal with on frontline ambulances. Because I mean, frontline ambulance, yes, you get a big job every now and then, and it's like, oh yeah, that was great, and you really had to be on it, but you're actually following algorithms that have sort of been ingrained into you since your first day of teaching as a paramedic. Whereas primary care is so multifaceted that you kind of you've got to know so many different things, and it's a real sort of, you're that last point of contact. On the ambulance, you would then refer to a GP if you don't think the patient needs to go to hospital, but in primary care, you are that last point of contact with the patient before nothing happens. So you have to be really holistic with your approach. So I think that having someone that comes in with a very holistic way of dealing with patients, a good patient manner, I see that in the way that the person would sort of engage with me in an interview, or even just when we're sort of doing ride outs on the car and stuff. But I wouldn't say that necessarily to come into primary care, you have to have done X, Y, and Z modules and have done X, Y, and Z experience. I think having the lecturing experience that I did bode in my advantage. I think that's why probably I was employed. I would say going into education would be a good sort of middle way to come into primary care, because it just allows you to brush up on your own knowledge, to be honest. Whilst you're teaching people, you're consolidating your own learning. And a lot of the modules sort of in the final years of the paramedic degree programs focus on minor injury and minor illness. So, you become an expert in it, and advanced assessments and stuff like that. And then you walk away from that and you're like, oh, that was actually really interesting, because it was really intricate details. Whereas, we can all sort of sort out a trauma job and, plug some wounds and sort out fluid therapy and stuff like that. But when it comes to the intricacies of primary care and minor injury, minor illness, you have to know quite a lot. So education, I would say, is a good little middle ground. So if you're either working on an ambulance as sometimes sort of training NQPs, newly qualified paramedics, that can be a good sort of indicator that perhaps you've done a little bit more education. That would be something I would look for. Obviously, so do you know about the first contact pathway?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's been a huge thing that's come out from higher education in England. We're now sort of looking to upskill our workforce into the first contact pathway. So it's the pillars of education, and it's looking for things like your advanced assessments in master's format, minor injury, minor illness, prescribing courses. We've literally been setting that up this week, actually, for our staff. So we start in September to upskill. But like I said, it's not a requirement. So I think paramedics are more equipped to deal with primary care than you would think, because I think people who aren't paramedics would assume that all we deal with is acute care, but we all know that's not the case. We mostly deal with primary care, but we don't have the resources to actually deal with it properly. So it's actually a very frustrating situation to be in, when you could treat a patient better or keep them at home in a much better environment, particularly elderly people, but you're stuck, your hands are tied because you can't get a referral, so you can't safety net that patient. So the joy of working in primary care is that you have all of that at your fingertips. You can safely leave people at home. The whole point of our service is to act as a stopgap between patients that may require hospital, but to keep them at home. That's it. So I think that everyone shouldn't sell themselves short. I think everyone is capable of coming into primary care. It's just whether you are keen to learn.
Yeah, I think it boils down to attitude as well, and kind of where someone is at their stage of life. Like, for example, ambulance service might be exactly what they're looking for, which is great. But I think it's also just an awareness, because I feel like I think I've repeated myself, but people aren't aware of what is out there and what primary care can lead to. Just because you're a paramedic, there's always that, instant association with the ambulance service. Oh, I'm working on the front line and I'll be doing that for the foreseeable. But like you said, look what's out there. But also, I think having the attitude, if you want to learn, if you want to progress, and you want to continue growing as a clinician, definitely have that attitude. And I think primary care could definitely be a good fit for you. So why do you think practices and primary care services are struggling at the moment to recruit paramedics? That's kind of a hot question. Kind of what do you think? What do you think is happening? Where is it going wrong? Because paramedics are becoming more aware of primary care opportunities. Practices are becoming more aware of the benefits a paramedic can add to their practice. Why is it that they're struggling? What's happening in between, would you say?
So gut feeling is that I think there's this culture of martyrism in the ambulance service, where if you're not going to incredibly traumatic jobs and you're not working crazy hours, then you're a cop-out. I've certainly been up against judgment for being in what everyone calls GP land. And it's seen as not being as worthy as frontline work. I think at some point I would have had that opinion for sure. And I understand why that opinion is had. Because, there is this certain feeling that you get when you're on a frontline ambulance and you're like, perceived as this hero, and it's really hard to ignore. That is something that is nice. But I think that there's two reasons why there's not enough paramedics in the roles. There's the first reason, that people think that they're going to be judged for going into primary care. I was recently, unfortunately, one of my friends had a quite a bad climbing accident, and we had to call the ambulance out because he fracture, dislocation, open tib fib. It was quite bad. And I was there sorting him out because I saw the whole thing happen. But then the ambulance came, and there was a older team leader of some sort that said, "Oh, so you don't work for the ambulance service?" And I was like, No, I left a while ago now. And he was like, "Oh, so what are you doing?" I said, "Primary care." And he went, "Oh, GP land, I see," like all this kind of thing. It was a very judgmental interface. And I think it's a lack of understanding of what we do. But, it does make you feel like, oh God, I'm not a proper paramedic. That's the first thing that comes to your head. But I think embracing how the job is evolving is the best way of doing it. The other side of it is, I think that some of the people that come into primary care, because of the work-life balance side of it, come to primary care to retire. So they come here to chill out, and that's it. Now, those people, similarly to how they would be on frontline ambulance, don't progress. And so they do end up in a monotonous role, which can become quite boring, as with any job. But actually, I'm purposely putting together quite a young team, because I think the culture of someone who is quite fresh to paramedic stuff, you're going to have, a bit more positivity about it, I think, because, everyone sort of wanes towards the end of their career. But also because I think the education that younger paramedics have received is far more appropriate for primary care. Even just the degrees now obviously involve minor injury, minor illness, like I said earlier. Whereas the old style courses didn't involve that, because it wasn't based around an ambulance service that dealt with primary care. So I quite like bringing in a young team that's enthusiastic, not coming into primary care to retire, and just really wants to progress and learn. So I think that's why we don't have enough people, is because there's people who have a bad opinion of primary care and what it's there for.
Yeah, no, of course. And do you ever feel like practices and GP services, themselves kind of misconstrued what a paramedic can do? Because I've spoken to practice managers, partners that sometimes don't really understand the benefit or don't have any clarity around what a paramedic could bring to their workforce. Do you think that's an issue?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, the whole reason why our company has now been successful in London since I was put there is because I've networked. I've networked with every single practice. We're starting in another location in 2 weeks' time. And there's 2 more other locations that are now interested in the neighbouring boroughs. And it's because as soon as you get into a practice and you network, we've got 14 practices that we started with in their primary care network. I went into all of them. I was like, "Hi, I'm Charlotte. Like, I've got loads of energy. Let's talk about paramedics." Like, yeah. And just became that sort of interface for them to ask questions. And now, as a result, there's nothing they don't trust me with, because they've realised actually we have the same skill set as a general practitioner, because we are general practitioners, we're just not doctors. That's the thing. So we can't prescribe, yes, but we can certainly work towards prescribing. But aside from that, we're completely well equipped to deal with this. You know, we can spot big sick, which is the main thing. And I think actually having paramedics in primary care is fantastic, because our threshold for being worried about a patient is much less than other practitioners, because we've seen really sick people. So actually it benefits patients because we can keep them in the community, because we feel safe to do that, because we know they're not actually really that sick. Whereas I know I've certainly on the front line been quite frustrated by the referrals we get sometimes, where we like turn up and like, this patient's fine, they don't need to go to hospital. It's actually counterintuitive for them to go to hospital because they're old and they're going to get an infection in hospital and so on and so forth. So I think there's definitely a lack of understanding, but I think it's definitely evolving. You know, having been in these 14 GP surgeries, now the way that we've expanded is through word of mouth. So different partners at different surgeries have been like, oh, actually, this is quite good. And, oh, they do this and this. And then it's kind of been expanding. But as far as I'm aware, we are the only service in London that delivers what we deliver. So I think it's really kind of early, or perhaps ahead of its time. But I see this being the consultation model going forwards, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've had a few practices as well that have had great success with home visiting paramedics, you know, actively recruiting them, saying, you know, we want someone from the frontline services, we want someone to come on board and build up that team. Like, I've had great success with that as well. So I feel like there is that correlation. I think it's just understanding, but practices are getting out there and they are learning. And I think it is about adding to that multidisciplinary team, because, you know, otherwise the workload would become, you know, almost impossible for a GP and just nurses solely. So it is about integrating those roles, you know, paramedics, even other roles like clinical pharmacists, PAs, etc. But I definitely see the huge benefit of paramedics. But yeah, just understanding, I think, really, and clarity.
I think you know, at some point, I don't know when it happened, emergency nurse practitioners became a thing, you know, and that's now an accepted role and everyone knows what they do. I think that if we're just in that phase where people are learning, and we will become as ingrained as an emergency nurse practitioner at some point. The other thing that you said about the home visiting service, I think that a lot of paramedics, we don't like to be caged. We're not inside people. So, you know, the thought of being inside a GP surgery or inside a hospital or anything like that literally terrifies you. But, you know, a word of advice out there for paramedics is there's plenty of services that, you know, I work on a car 2 days a week, doing home visits on my own out in an ambulance car, you know. So it's not necessarily a format of having to be inside a hospital or a GP surgery. You can certainly go out into the wild as you're used to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess, what do you think the future holds for paramedics in primary care? Well, I'd love to hear your answer on this. Yeah, what do you think? Tell me all, Charlotte.
It's limitless. What can I say? So, I mean, I'm currently working in an urgent treatment centre. It's a pilot study that's happening at the moment, looking at the role of the paramedic in terms of shadowing general practitioners. It's been going very well. And I think what will happen with paramedics is, if you want to work in a hospital, for example, there's a huge shortage of GPs, as everyone knows, and where we're being upskilled to a degree of advanced roles and such like, I think that the role of the advanced care practitioner will become the main point of contact in a hospital, and you will have, say, 5 ACPs in UTC or A&E or wherever, and then you'll have 1 consultant GP. And so we will see all of these patients and churn them out and all that kind of thing. But then you have a point of contact with more superior knowledge at the end of the day, who, if you don't do your prescriptions or whatever, they can do the prescriptions. Or if you're, you know, not particularly sure on a patient, they've got that superior knowledge. So you have that person that's overseeing all of these people. And so I think that's the model that it will be going towards in the future. But like I say, this is the pilot study going on. So, you know, it's very early in its days, but it's going well. Aside from that, I mean, paramedics are popping up all over the place, you know, in prisons, in on aeroplanes and in GP surgeries. I think that we're in a very fortunate position that I don't see that paramedics won't be everywhere, to be honest. It's just about getting out there what we do, which is why, I wanted to do this podcast, because it's so hugely under-recognized. We're ambulance drivers, and people don't know how much education we receive now, or the different, things that we can do. When people say, oh, you're a paramedic, oh, do you drive the ambulances then? And I'm like, nope. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
So I think the sky's the limit at this point, and I'm feeling very positive about it. We just need more people to be coming over to primary care and seeing that it's not just somewhere you go to retire. So
No, exactly. And I love that answer. Almost like the world's your oyster for paramedics.
Precisely.
It really is. Well, thank you so much, Charlotte, for joining us on our Illuminating Primary Care podcast. It's been great. Thoroughly enjoyed listening to kind of your experience firsthand and your opinions on the matter. I've been your host, Jasmine Kaur, nursing and night health specialist recruitment consultant. But for now, we'll leave you to it. But make sure to stay tuned for our next episode.